Welcome, everyone, to another Through the Leadership Lens, a podcast presented by the Women in Propane Council. I'm Freddie Riddler.
And I'm Bridget Kidd.
And welcome, Steve, to our show. But before we get started, here's a quick sponsorship by Irish Propane.
Through the Leadership Lens is sponsored by Irish Propane Corporation, serving Western and Central New York. For all your residential and commercial propane needs, choose Irish Propane. Irish Propane is a locally operated, New York State certified, woman-owned business. For more information, visit irishpropane.com. Irish Propane delivers peace of mind.
So before we get started, Steve, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Freddie, and thanks, Bridget, for having me on the pod today. My name is Steve Kaminski, and I am the president and CEO of the National Propane Gas Association. And it is my pleasure to be here. And I want to say thanks not only to Irish Propane for sponsoring, but also to Women in Propane for putting on this podcast series.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Hey, Steve. So, on this podcast, we're talking about leadership and what leadership means to you. Can you kick us off by just talking about what does leadership mean to you and what does it look like for you?
Sure. Leadership is an interesting thing, and it's something that over the course of my career has meant different things to me as I've matured through my career and had the opportunity to take various leadership roles. For me, what it really looks like is three things. I would say three primary things. Number one being transparency. Number two being inspiring through example. And then really not being afraid to give accolades. So I'll explain what I mean by each of those. So first is really transparency. And to me, that's the most important thing in any leadership role, is not to hide any balls, whether it's tough times or good times. Share what's happening with your colleagues. The proverbial open door policy is great, but it really means being proactive and saying, okay, we're having a difficult time in this area or this situation, and being honest about it. And then likewise, when times are going really well, share those things with the staff, with the people you lead. I think that really sets a good environment and really helps morale for the team that you're working with. The second thing is inspiring through example, and that's really being the hardest worker in the room or an equally hard worker in the room to the members of your team. Strategic thinking, of course, is a hallmark of being a good leader, but the effort really has to be there as well for you to help inspire the folks that you're working with. And then I would say the last thing is giving credit. Don't be afraid to give accolades. It's not just the attaboy, job well done, and things like that. But it's really in front of other people, giving credit where credit is due. So, for example, one thing that I try to do a lot of is, let's just say we're at a board meeting or even an executive committee meeting where it's the volunteer leadership of the association. If there are team members at any level, from coordinator level to a manager to a director to a vice president, who have really moved the needle on an initiative, giving them credit, letting them present, letting them answer questions, not having them be silent, I think is really important. And it demonstrates to the whole team that it's a team effort. And so that's how I like to practice leadership. And I think that's really what leadership means to me, is being a committed, transparent team member across the board.
Great.
That's great. So I want to touch on one thing you talked about: inspiration, your second point there. They're all three great points. Steve, I've been honored to be in some of the meetings where you've discussed a few topics. And I actually talked to Nancy Coop and I said, who is that guy? This was a year ago. And she's like, that's Steve, the MPGA president and this and that. And I said, he's so inspiring. Like when he talks, he has control of the room. Everyone's paying attention. You could tell like when Steve is present because people are paying attention. Let's flip
Freddie.
that. What inspires you, Steve?
That's a great question, and thank you to Nancy. That's wonderful to hear. Nancy is fantastic, and good to hear. I mean, I think what inspires me is someone who is both strong but also humble is really that combination that really is most impactful, at least for what I've seen in my career. You obviously want a leader who is strong, who is confident, takes their positions, from a place of strength, and really demonstrates that they have a handle on things, even if things are tricky or difficult or complicated. That you feel comfortable that with their leadership you will get through this. I think that's extremely important, but I also think it's important to be humble. And some of the leaders in my life that I've respected most are those people who are humble and who will say, I don't know the answer to that. Let me find out. Or this is a more complicated problem than I have experience with. Or maybe even this is more than we can, we've bitten off more than we can chew. Let's take a step back. I think sort of that combination, at least to me, is the hallmark of a good leader, leading with force and vigor, but also understanding either when things aren't going the right way or you've taken a step too far or in the wrong direction, and stepping back and saying, I made a mistake, and owning if you make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes in life. So I think that's really important.
That's great. Steve, can you tell us about a time when maybe you had to change your leadership style, or there was an opportunity to do something maybe a little bit different? Or with a lot of guests, we've talking about how leadership, whether you're stepping into a new role or in various situations, can oftentimes be risky. So can you maybe talk about that? And if you've had a time where you had to take a risk or you had to really shift out of your comfort zone?
Sure. I mean, I'm sure I could think of 601 examples. I mean, it's kind of unlimited in terms of taking risks. I do think that taking risks is one of the sort of most important things you can do as a leader. Couple of examples I'll mention. First is just in terms of being proactive. So MPGA, we are the industry's advocacy arm in the United States, right? And so we do things in front of Congress, the White House, every one of the federal agencies that impacts the propane world. We support state and regional associations on things. So a lot of our work tends to be defensive, right? There's a new code or standard or regulation that's come out, and we need to push back or fight back and things of that nature. But I also think it's equally important to be proactive. And that's something, my leadership style is always being proactive. So right now, we're pushing the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for an exemption around hours of service waivers that each company could undertake given different circumstances. That's a proactive approach. We're pushing the Federal Trade Commission to modify the yellow energy guide labels to use the full fuel cycle rather than cite emissions data. Things that are really proactive that can positively impact the industry. I think that's one way that I lead by proactivity. And also, I ask all of my teammates, the folks on our staff, if anyone ever asks me in an interview, what is it you're looking for? What quality are you looking for in a position? My first answer is always proactivity, right? And so being a proactive person, finding new ways to do things, better ways to do things, things that can really move the industry forward. That's the most important thing to me. But there are tons of examples of ways that proactivity, I think, is vital. Sure. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that's great. I mean, we have been trying to talk about leadership kind of outside of your current role, right? And outside of like, this is my job and this is what I do. And, there's certainly by title alone, right? You're a leader, but there's so many other ways to demonstrate leadership. And obviously we talk within the industry about leadership by joining associations and volunteering your time and mentoring other people. Are there ways outside of your current role where you feel like pretty proud of being a leader and being engaged in another group?
Yeah, I mean, in multiple ways. So, I mean, outside of the NPGA, but within I would say, the scope of my professional career, I sit on a number of bodies. I'll just use one for example. It's a mentorship group designed for individuals who are from historically underserved communities, who are trying to, for lack of a better word, rise up the corporate ladder in the association world. So I serve as a mentor in that program and really help individuals who are basically mid-career, who want to keep stepping up into increased roles of leadership, but they perhaps are from communities that are historically underserved. So I'm really proud of that. I also am a very strong proponent in the disability space. So I do a lot of things outside of my profession for folks who have physical disabilities, and that's really important work to me. So I do think that being a well-rounded leader is important. Taking on things that in ways you quote unquote give back, but also areas that are important to you personally, right? You're always going to thrive most in areas that you care about most. And to the extent that as someone who has an opportunity to give back, I don't love the word give back, but to really help others achieve what they want to achieve, I think is it's not only the hallmark of a really good leader, but I think it's also important to satisfy yourself emotionally as well as professionally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's one of the benefits that we have in this is seeing all the places where people are engaged, and you got to flex that muscle in various places. I mean, I think to be successful for sure.
Yeah.
So, Steve, you talked about proactivity. Let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about that. Was that something that one day you just knew that you had that quality, that skill, or was that something that someone influenced you to be more proactive? And if they did, who was that? When did this all happen? Like, when did you know that was the top quality? When somebody asks you, who should we look for?
I think it's sort of what I've seen. I think it's less about someone influencing me and more along the lines of just what I've seen in my career about what gets someone to the next step, or gets someone ahead, or really represents and does a good job representing their industry or their company. A couple of jobs ago, I was with a Fortune 500 company, and it was important to be proactive, to basically set yourself apart and to help that company. So I think it's similar here, that that level of proactivity is really it's what gets you noticed by others. I think the thing when I see leadership and I see growing in roles, I think it's twofold. I think it's proactivity, and then the other area that I think is very important is having a positive outlook. I mean, sometimes I can be the most pessimistic person in the room. If there are things that could threaten the industry, et cetera, I want to make sure that I impart to the folks that I'm talking to how important things are and how complicated and difficult this might be. But in terms of leadership of folks on our staff and on our team, I think having positivity is very important. It doesn't mean hide the ball. I definitely want to be transparent when things are difficult. But one of the quotes that I like using is, I'd rather say, congratulations, you ran a half marathon, rather than, wow, you quit halfway through a marathon, right? It's really taking something that has pros and cons and being positive and proactive about that. And that's really, that I've taken from an individual who I used to work with when I was in a Fortune 500 company, and they were in a business role, and they had an extremely stressful and extremely difficult role. They were responsible for a book of close to $3 billion of business. And he could have taken the approach of everything is stressing me out. Everyone that he's working with is doing everything wrong. And that wasn't his approach. He had a very proactive, positive attitude about things. And it really resonated well with me. And it wasn't something we particularly talked about individually, but it was just more something I picked up on by working with him, helping him on many things, seeing him in a variety of different contexts, whether it be at the company itself or representing the company in negotiations and deals and things of that nature. And I think that's sort of what influenced me most on that front.
Mhm. That's great. Steve, so we talked about, like, you model things after other people and you get to be around people, and you notice how impactful certain competencies are, and you want to model that. What do you do to grow your leadership skills? What do you do to make sure that you don't get stagnant?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, I am trying to improve on those every day. So there are a couple of organizations that I work with in the DC area that are geared toward National Trade Association CEOs. And so I attend a couple of conferences every year, and it's really learning best practices. And for me, it's talking with my peers, whether through one of those conferences or over lunches, or I'm on another group that has a 7 a.m. breakfast every single month. And it's really talking with peers at other trade associations. I mean, it's twofold, right? It's great networking so that when I need, something from another national trade association, for example, we were working with the National Federation of Retailers this morning on an issue. I have those connections, but it's also really good to learn from those folks, both in terms of content and challenges that they're facing, but also styles, leadership styles, and how they're tackling certain problems can have a huge array and variance. And you glean a lot of things from having these discussions with peers. So I would say that's the primary way I continue to grow in my leadership style, is by talking with peers at other associations and really seeing how they're doing things. And then, of course, also, to be honest with you, growing in the propane industry. I mean, it's a little cheesy, but we have a lot of LP geniuses in this industry, and there are a lot of really smart people when it comes to really complex subjects in the propane world. So kudos to all of our colleagues in the propane sector for imparting your wisdom and not being afraid to talk through issues. That's the other thing too. I think it doesn't matter what your role is or what people think your role is. Ask questions. I mean, that is advice that, I've never had a situation where someone said, "Oh, that's a terrible question. That's a stupid question." I mean, if you ask a question, people are going to genuinely think you're interested and know that you're interested and want to help you so that you can assist in whatever you're doing. So even the most basic questions after you've been in the industry for a long time are okay. Don't be afraid to ask questions and say, I've heard about this for 6 months and I thought I understood it, but I think I maybe actually don't understand it. And don't be afraid to ask, because people in this industry are great and you can learn a lot, and they'll really recognize that, hey, they really want to dig into this issue. So that's another thing that I would definitely stress is, don't be afraid to ask questions. No question is too basic, and ask questions of anybody and everybody. I mean, I am not afraid to ask a question to the president of UGI AmeriGas, or to ask a question of a service tech in a single bobtail facility or a bulk plant facility. So that both are equally important.
So I have a question for you then. Did you say LP geniuses?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I actually wrote that down. I might use that later on. That's a good.
I didn't invent that. I don't remember where I picked it up from, but I kind of love it.
So, Steve, one of the questions we like to ask at the other Through the Leadership Lens podcast, a podcast presented by the Women in Propane Council, is the leadership role can come with a risk, right? Some decisions can be risky. Can you go through a story of when you made a risky decision and the outcome of it?
Oh gosh, I didn't prep for that question. That's a good question. Do you want a positive one or a negative one?
Positive one.
A positive one. Okay, terrific. I actually have to think. I actually have to think through this. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to reference one from a former association. So I used to my first position as a CEO of a national trade association was in the healthcare sector. And without going into details, we had a very sophisticated database of health records, housed about 65 million case narratives and things of that nature related to individual cases. And we basically sold de-identified data, and the business model was losing money hand over fist, and we really needed to make some big decisions around that. And we had been using an outside vendor to manage this database to the tune of several $millions a year for decades. And there was a lot of comfort all around it, but it was just, we could not continue to pay those bills without continuing to lose money. And so I took a pretty big risk in that we completely overhauled and revamped this data system and data center, brought on a new vendor, ended up saving at the end of the day about 60% of what we're putting into it per year to run the same operations, but completely overhauled how we were doing it. There was a huge risk associated with it. There were multiple types of risk. There was financial risk, that it could have gone very poorly and we could have lost all of our sales contracts. There was a risk of actually losing information, publicly protected information, not the public side, but the private side, et cetera. But it was about an 18-month process to overhaul this system, and it came out perfect. It came out really well, and ended up saving the association just millions of dollars a year, and really actually making the system better, more modern, et cetera. But it was a significant risk, and it took a lot of, I guess I would say, both strategy and guts to pull off together. I had the support of my board of directors, which was great, but it took a lot of legwork in order to get that support. It took a lot of trust that I built up over the series of series of years, as well as sort of respect that I could pull this off. So I guess that would be a good example, without going into details, of where I was able to take a pretty big risk and it worked out well.
That's a great risky story, Steve. Thank you for sharing that. So, another great question we like to ask, and it's always fun to hear all the different interviewees' responses to this question. What's the best advice anyone has ever given you? That's a good question.
That's a good question. I mean, I think it would really be not to be afraid to be bold, even if it means being imperfect at times, failing at times. Take big swings, be bold, get out there, and don't be afraid of it, and don't apologize for it, and be honest and say, you know what, this is a big swing. It may fail, but it also might succeed. I think really that's the most important advice. I mean, so many times, especially early in your career or midway through your career, you can be afraid to take a bold swing at something for fear of failing and fear of how it looks. But as long as you're honest about the chances and the opportunities, I think that's really the best advice I've ever gotten. I mean, obviously, don't be so risky that if it fails, it is going to completely negatively impact everything that your company or your organization is working on. But being proactive, being bold, and taking risks definitely pays dividends, I think. The other thing, I'll give you two, actually. There's another thing and this is, my leadership style has definitely changed over time. And this was important to me to learn as I moved along in my career, is to really be more patient. It's funny because I'm saying be bold, but I'm also saying be patient. Being bold doesn't mean do things fast and do things necessarily aggressively. Sometimes, especially early in my career, I would act too quickly. I wouldn't take the time to think about it, think through things, gather information from a lot of other people who it could impact, or other companies who it could impact. And I would just take steps, not, sometimes you think, oh, well, I know better than everyone else. Well, maybe you don't, number one. Maybe, it doesn't matter what your experience is and who you are. Maybe you don't know better, but also even more to the point is, you don't know everything from every angle. Usually when you take a step, and it's a significant change, of course, it's going to impact, let's just say 3, 4, 6, 7 different groups in different ways, and really having the patience to understand from each angle how it's going to impact them. I think it is important. I'll give you my one of my favorite cheesy dad jokes, which is the early bird gets the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. And I think that's sort of impactful here, is have patience. Most things are not going to go away if you don't jump at it immediately without gathering that sort of input.
That's great. And I'm also stealing that joke. I'm stealing that joke.
Feel free.
My kids will be home from school. It plays nicely, though, if that's the advice you've been given, that then now you're also saying your advice would be to ask questions, because I think that curiosity would lead to a better foundation to make bold decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So are we ready for the whip round?
We're ready.
All right.
Get excited, Steve.
These are the hardest questions that we're going to ask you today, so get ready.
All right.
I'm going first. This is my favorite question. It was not my question that I came up with, but I love it, and I ask it to people all the time now. What do you keep in the trunk of your car?
Definitely not dead bodies. No, no, seriously.
They're in your freezer.
Yeah. I am watching the Dahmer thing on Netflix.
Oh God.
I knew that was coming.
It's something else. I would say jumper cables and a really lot of dog hair. Not in the trunk, but in the back seat.
What kind of dog?
I have a 120-pound Greater Swiss Mountain Dog.
Oh,
He's
120
adorable.
pound. Wow.
Named
Otto.
Oh.
OTTO.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the sweetest thing.
Oh, that's great.
That's fun. There's a new movie coming out with Tom Hanks called Otto. You'll have to watch a trailer for that.
Oh, really? I did not know that. Okay.
I just saw it the other day.
Maybe I'll watch it with
Steve, I wrote down a separate question than the normal ones that we normally ask you.
Sure.
You have a 7 a.m. breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
What do you order? What's your favorite breakfast when you go out to eat for breakfast?
Oh, gosh. I would say hash browns with hot sauce, and then anything that's around that, and a lot of coffee.
I'm with you. What about, take yourself back to your 16-year-old self. Okay. What do you wish you would have known then that you know now? Or maybe just what do you wish you knew then and maybe you still don't know it?
That Carousel works? No, I don't know. I would say, I'm going to put it in I'm going to be a little more serious and put it in the context of a leadership perspective. And I would say that your uniqueness is a positive, not a negative, right? When you're 16 years old, you think anything that's different about you is a negative. And maybe not in 2022. I mean, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I will say she and her friends embrace their uniqueness, which is great. But when I was 16 years old, it was more of the how can I fit in? How can I blend in? That kind of thing. And didn't really see the unique attributes as a positive. So I think that's the one thing that I would take away is don't be afraid to embrace the thing that makes you different from other people.
That's great. I like that. I have a 16-year-old son too, so I really like to hear their responses to that question.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So Steve,
we'll have to catch up offline about the shenanigans. So hopefully not too bad.
Do we have time for that? So what's your ideal vacation?
I think my ideal vacation is going anywhere really that I have never been before and experiencing a culture that I've never been to. So anything from an area that is the most downtrodden to the wealthiest, you name it, just seeing something. I want to see everything at least once. I want to go everywhere at least once. So I am less of a sit on a beach and drink pina coladas guy. I am much more of a, active on my feet. I want to see that volcano. I want to see the thing that I have never seen before.
That's great. You got to invite us when you go. I'm in. Okay.
Do you want to go to the world meeting in India next month? Because that'll be something.
Except that
Wow.
I'm not in for that one. I would, but not this year. Okay, I'm going to modify a question as well.
Okay.
If you were not in the role that you're in, propane industry or otherwise, kind of CEO, trade association kind of jazz, what would you be doing?
It's interesting. And in a past role, two past roles that are really interesting to me. For a while I was so I started my career as a corporate attorney, and one of my clients or multiple of my clients were professional sports leagues, and I had the opportunity on several occasions to represent the National Football League, and that was phenomenal. And I actually had the opportunity at one point early on my career to work with them, but it would have required a move, and it just didn't work in that time frame. But I think working for a professional sports league just would have been phenomenal. I'm a huge sports fan, so that would have been great. And then I also I did spend 6 years in the television industry, which I loved. I don't regret moving into the trade association space from that, but I really enjoyed working in the television industry. So I would say that might be another area. I would have been very happy also staying in that area. I'm certainly don't regret the move, but it was a great 6 years of my life in that space.
Yeah, great.
So I got a fun question since you're a sports guy. Who's your favorite NFL team? And I'm going to follow it up with why, because people ask me why I'm a Vikings fan, and it's really hard to explain that. So I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite NFL team and why?
It's the Detroit Lions, sadly. I grew up in rural Michigan. I grew up in farm country about halfway between Detroit and Flint. I'm a big Michigan football fan and a big Lions fan, and it's tough sledding. It really is. I was super thrilled that Matt Stafford won the Super Bowl last year because unlike his predecessors, Barry Sanders and Kelvin Johnson, Megatron, who, never left Detroit. He actually left and had some success. So it's hometown roots. It's tough, but
it is hometown roots.
That is.
So, yeah. And so why the Vikings?
Why?
Yeah.
Same thing. I lived in Minnesota, rural Minnesota, always been a Vikings fan. They've taken me almost where I could see the end of it, but then they break your heart. It's like a roller coaster. It's like a bad date that never goes away, but it's always there. And then every year I keep saying, this is the year, but it's like any other Minnesota sports team. We start off strong and end not so well.
Yeah, I don't know what's worse. I think well, at least you got the date. I don't even get a date with the Lions.
That's fun.
Well, I can't miss this opportunity to say, go Phils. We are big Phillies fans, and we had a big weekend here. So we are excited.
Yeah, Philly sports in general. The Eagles are
on fire.
They broke my heart a few years ago. Vikings went there and didn't do so well.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Oh, well, there's always this year and next year and the following year.
Exactly. All right, Steve, our last question. We are so appreciative of your time and getting this time to chat and hear from your perspective about leadership. But the last thing we ask is, what advice, or is there anything else you'd want to offer to the listeners? Some in the propane industry and some not in the industry.
I would just say, always take the high road, no matter how difficult, no matter what's happening. Take the high road. Don't take the low road. It means something slightly different to every single person, but most people know what that means in the context of their career and, the situations that they're in. And I think it's a little cliche, but I think it is sage advice that always goes over well is take that high road, even no matter how difficult it is in the situation.
Good. Yeah. Good advice to give.
And great way to end, I think, too.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Bridget.
Steve. Thanks, Freddie. This was fun, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. Thanks, Bridget. And again, thanks to Women in Propane for putting this on, and for you guys for your time and all the things that it takes to behind the scenes to put this together. This is great.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone in the propane industry. It's been a great experience, and everyone in the industry has just been tremendous.
This has been another episode of Through the Leadership Lens presented by Women in Propane. Be sure to subscribe, download, and share with a friend. To learn more about Women in Propane, visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or online at www.womeninpropane.org. I'm Freddie Riddler.
And I'm Bridget Kidd. Thanks for listening. Until next time.